I've lost entirely complete faith in the Premier League, and by that, indirectly meaning the power brokers within each club, to be able to do the job that they're supposed to do. Like in order to have presented an amendment last week that would have stopped teams like Chelsea not only selling their hotels to themselves to get themselves out of last year's FFP dilemma, but because they presented an amendment that was vague and broad and non-specific around what infrastructure assets means, even the clubs that wanted to approve it rejected it, because the people that wrote the amendment, the lawyers or whoever, they're getting paid hundreds and hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds, like thousands of pounds an hour to do a bit of a job. And I swear to God, I could have written a more specific amendment than these clowns. And of course, so it's been rejected, right? It's been rejected. And the next time, but there's every intention that they still want to implement the rule, but that won't happen now for ages. And so Chelsea have been able to spend £1 billion, 1.1 billion, 1.2 billion, I think it will be.
Yeah.
Now they're going to be able to sell their training ground to their sister company, spend as much more as they want. And they're the only other team that look busy in the market. And this is the team that's supposed to be the one team that's not doing anything because they're supposed to be in trouble. The FFP thing is an absolute disgrace, Johnny. We'll talk about it in more detail.
Can I just add to that? Can I just add to that? Because this has been a real bugbear of mine, okay? We have a Chelsea team that were buying up every bit of youth, had 32 players out on loan.
Yeah.
32 players on loan.
Ridiculous.
And then what happens is UEFA turned around and said, we can't have this, right? So what happened? It affected everybody. So because Chelsea were doing that, we had to change the rules. Then it was 8, 7, 6 maximum allowed. Then they came up with, let's do 8-year contracts, which no one else was doing. Now they're going to do that, but it's after the horse has bolted.
Yeah.
Chelsea, there's not meant to be multi-ownership within the same league. Yet we have the Saudi PIF fund, right, owning Newcastle, yet happen to be the biggest shareholder in Clear Lake Capital, who happen to own Chelsea, who happen to travel to Saudi Arabia to get some money for the thing. And
last summer they sold 4 players to Chelsea. This summer they're about to sell Lukaku to 40 million quid to Saudi Arabia as well. I mean, that's
and now this.
And now there's so much more. There's so much more beyond behind the surface, right? Forget about Chelsea's. You know what? Let's talk about it now. So let's get back to we were talking about Chelsea, right? And the fact that so Lukaku's going to be their next, overly valued sale. And at the moment you've got this situation going on with Manchester City that are suing the Premier League because they're essentially saying, how dare the Premier League tell anybody what the valuation of a sponsorship deal is. It's anti-competitive and it's a disgrace. And I understand why they want to do it, even though I think that in so doing, they are admitting that they have overly inflated their sponsorship deals in the past, and they want to continue to do so. They already have a competitive advantage. They started in 2008. They had 4-year head start before FFP even came in. They used it brilliantly. They created their City Football Group. They just like Chelsea buying all the youth. They buy all the youth and loan it out, and yet they want to be able to get as much money as they possibly can, Johnny. Chelsea agree with them for the same reasons you said, right? They got ambitious owners that want to spend more money, and they've got VCs in the background that have got links to endless pots of money. Aston Villa have got Egypt's most wealthiest man.
They just joined today. The law, they're potentially threatening to join the lawsuit because they've got endless pots of money, like you say. Yeah. And what they've realised is, hang on, I bought a football club for X amount of money, and you're telling me I've got all this money and I'm not allowed to spend it? That can't be right. I want to spend it. I want to buy every great player that's on the planet. Well, something has to give. Rules are rules, right? There's no point having a rule, and then when someone breaks the rule, you go, well, okay, well, it was you. We'll let you off this time. It's happening too much. It's become a farce. We're becoming the laughing stock, basically, I believe, this league, with what's going on right now.
But is the who's to blame here, right? Like, the Premier League rules are the Premier League teams get together with their accountants and their lawyers and their advisors, and they say these are the amendments this month, right, or this year, whatever it was. I think they meet once a quarter, but most of the amendments that are discussed throughout the season take place in the June meeting. It happened just now. For example, there were 3 amendments this time around. One of them, Wolves put forward an amendment to scrap VAR altogether. And I think that, according to polls I saw on Twitter, that is overwhelmingly supported by the fans. They don't want VAR at all, but the majority of the teams rejected it. They said no, they want to keep VAR, but they do want to see improvements. One of the other things was this idea around stopping third party or stopping sales to sister companies within your group, paper profits, essentially, to be able to robbing Peter to pay Paul. And it makes sense. And the majority, there's the 4 teams that always reject: Chelsea, Newcastle, City, and Villa. But the rest are all on board with the idea of it. But who's at fault? Is it Chelsea's fault for loopholing it, for being smart enough to figure out, well, look, they haven't closed that door, so we'll go and get some value here. We'll walk through that door when that one's closed. But the Premier League put forward a proposition that had so many, it was a sieve. It had so many holes in it that it was ridiculous. So I'm sitting here thinking, I don't blame Chelsea for taking advantage of loopholes. It's the difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance, right? For me, it's like, you can limit the amount of tax you have to pay as long as you don't lie and circumvent the system. Chelsea are just using the system to their advantage. And the fact that the rest of the Premier League teams, who get paid millions in lawyer fees, can't put together a thorough document that closes out all the loopholes, to me, it's not on Chelsea. To me, that is on the Premier League. It's on Daniel Levy. It's on the guys at Arsenal, at Crystal Palace, everywhere else, who want there to be a level playing field, but are not clever enough to think of all of the things that one club can outthink them in loopholes. It seems to me it's stupid.
It's almost like they're scared. I mean, I do believe that Chelsea are the poison, but I believe that, you know, the Premier League haven't eradicated the poison right from the start. Abramovich was the initial poison.
Yeah, he was, 2002.
Abramovich manipulated, paid off people. The goings on, you know, if we delve into the Abramovich era, I mean, God knows how many rule breaks there are amongst that. I mean, the fact that that money still has not been paid out, and I believe, Sean, is still sitting in the account. The money
for what? For the hotels?
For the buyout. Yeah. No, for the buyout, the original money. It's still sitting in an account somewhere.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that.
Where it was meant to go. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
To the victims of the Ukraine war.
1 point something billion. Yeah. I mean, listen, look, Chelsea broke, as I said before, Chelsea broke the rules, pushed the boundaries on buying up everyone, even though they didn't want them. We got all the money. Let's buy everybody and loan them all out. So they cut that loophole. Then it was the 8-year contracts. Then you know, it was the, you know, selling it to yourself, selling items to yourself.
I was also going across to Saudi Arabia, coming back 24 hours later, and within 3 days, 4 players have been sold maximum value. Like, if you're not allowed to, if every time that you sell, if every time that you sign a sponsorship deal, then it has to go to some committee somewhere that determines whether or not that's based in reality. And remember, Manchester City's Etihad deal is like 92% above the equivalent valuation of any other sponsorship deal that has been signed on a per brand valuation basis in any other sport in the world. So it's clear that Etihad deal is miles above.
You can break records. Look, there's nothing wrong with breaking records. Records are there to be broken. Historically, that's how it works. But, you know, for me, when you have someone, say, for example, you have QSI, right? Within QSI, there are God knows how many different companies within QSI. So it's like, if Spurs were taken over by QSI, and then QSI, one of his subsidiary companies, then became the stadium sponsor, giving us 100 million a year. for the naming rights, right? Then they became, instead of Get Here, it's whoever on this.
Yeah.
Then they name it, then they do the kits, the board advertising. But they're all companies within subsidiary companies within the one umbrella company.
Which is fine as long as they stick within a standard deviation. Well, as long as the valuations are within a standard deviation of everyone else's,
correct.
You know, as long as they're reasonable. But Manchester City's weren't, and they're arguing that they should be allowed to do what they want. But then, to me, the next question will be: even if that rule is implemented, maintained, upheld, and City have to at least be reasonable, you know, and within reason. Because they're the biggest revenue-generating football club in world football, I think, other than Real Madrid, maybe it's them, maybe it's not, then you could make the argument that they could generate and justify a brand deal that is at the highest end of them, just not 90% higher than where it should be. But the next question to me is, if that door is then closed, can you make the same assessment about assets? Like, for example, Chelsea selling Lukaku for 50 million quid to Saudi Arabia when the guy was sent out on loan for the last 2 years because
no one wanted
him. No one would pay the money. And so all of a sudden, your mate, who also is the biggest shareholder in your biggest club share, like, can you, at what point?
This is what's wrong, Sean. This is a fundamental thing that it's clear. This is fraud, in my opinion, and corruption right in front of our eyes. They're not even hiding it. Like I say, PSI own Newcastle. They are the Saudi PSI fund, the Saudi National Fund, the richest fund in the world, right? They own Newcastle. They're the biggest shareholder in Chelsea. There is a conflict of interest. I don't want to hear anything else, right? They are the biggest shareholder, and therefore they're doing business. The funny thing is that Todd Bowley and the guy who bought Todd Bowley to Spurs to try and take over, that could have easily been us. He's a Spurs supporter, the guy who's organised all this,
right?
Who's now got rid of all his Spurs stuff off of his social, to speak. And he's the guy that's involved in all the finance and the property deals.
But would you want that sort of owner at Tottenham Hotspur?
Well,
it would be so exciting as a fan to sit there every single day going, oh, today we're linked with Mbappe, tomorrow we're linked with Gyökeres, the next day we're linked with, insert whatever name there. As a content creator, it would be sensational. But do you think Todd Bowley's done a good job? Ultimately, at the end of the day, Johnny, you still have to, he is an investor. He is not someone who has more wealth in the ground than it exists in existence, and whose mission statement is different. For Saudi Arabia, for Etihad, for Abu Dhabi, for Qatar, for these guys, their ideology is not, or what drives them is not about making a return on investment necessarily. They don't care about money. What drives them is being the very best in a global sport and allowing it to somehow have some collateral impact on the brand of where they're from. And I think that there's a different motivating factor. But for Todd Bowley and Clear Lake Capital, those guys are eventually looking for some sort of ROI. And whether or not they're robbing Peter to pay Paul,
return on investment to those guys who were wondering what he was talking about.
Return on investment, yeah. Sorry, yeah. But whether or not they are robbing the Peter to pay Paul, moving the training ground around so they can kick the can down the road, at some point in the future, they're going to have to pay the Pied Piper. And at the end of the day, they spent £1.2 billion, and they just qualified for the weakest competition in Europe, for the Conference League that doesn't even, and that first of all exposes them to tighter rules than in the Premier League, but also doesn't offer them any kind of compensation that will make it worthwhile. To me, I don't know if Todd Bowley is what any fan of football should want running their club.
There's people behind him, Sean, who are very, very intelligent people. Look, the bigger picture is they've been doing this deal for the last year, a crucial bit of property at Chelsea, which can change hands for around about 60, 70 million, which will enable them to develop the land. Okay.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And this has been going on for
this
quite
is
long.
for the state. This is for the stadium, is it?
Yeah. I've told people about this a long while ago. It's the same guy as the Spurs fan who's been sorting it all out. But look, the thing
is that what the one? Because I remember when they took over the club, they had the debt written off by Abramovich, and they paid $2.5 billion, but they also promised. I think they paid 2.5 or 3 billion. I forget what they paid, but they also allocated £1.5 billion towards the club's future spend, and I assumed that was where the 1.2 billion was coming from. But are you saying that money's allocated for the stadium rebuild?
Well, I know that they want to do the stadium. It's about, I think it's rotating the stadium, and this particular piece of property was one of the key parts of that development. But we're talking years down the line. But I just think there's a lot of money behind him. There's some top lawyers behind him, top lawyers, and they've exploited it. Look, Chelsea have pushed the envelope again and again and again, looking for those loopholes, and I got to hand it to them. They've been better than anybody pushing that envelope for years, right?
I don't blame them. I hate, but I absolutely hate the fact that Daniel Levy. You know, like every rival fan, because the fans are split, right? Some fans say Man City 115 charges, bury these guys. If they get away with it, it's because of ineptitude at the Premier League level and brilliantly expensive lawyers at Manchester City's side. It's the same with the Chelsea thing. And you have 115 charges hanging over their head. Regardless of all of that stuff, you've got a section of the general football fan base that say that FFP and PSR is necessary because otherwise Manchester City and Newcastle and Chelsea will dominate, and then it will be a race to the bottom. It will just be everyone might as well sell to the wealthiest man, and it can just be a playground and the whole thing will implode anyway. The Premier League will be worthless, and it will be the inevitability of a movement towards the Super League, right? Which is just as bad an idea. But the other half of the people, the other half of the fan base say, actually, FFP and PSR has just cemented the advantage that the top six have. And I'll give you a little bit of a teaser. I'm doing a load of research into two different videos. It's supposed to be one, but consequently, the things I found have split it off into two. One about analyzing trophy success historically, to figure out how much of an influence Daniel Levy has had in our absence in the last 25 years of trophies versus other things. And the other topic I'm going to be talking about in detail is PSR and FFP. But there is an absolutely legitimate argument from teams who look at FFP and PSR right now and say, how can any other team, Fulham, Palace, West Ham, Southampton, Brighton, Brentford, whatever, insert any team from sixth down, how can any of them ever break into that movement unless they go through a 20-year cycle of infrastructure spend, which has all the risk, similar to what Tottenham did, or unless they sell to a trillionaire? Like the FFP thing stops competition as much as it prevents City from spending any more than they should be able to. It also stops the smaller clubs from being able to be ambitious. And I think that,
especially a small club like Luton or a Bournemouth, when they've got small stadiums. I personally think, Sean, that if Man City are found guilty and they lose this, that Sheikh Mansour will start to withdraw from Man City, coincide with Pep leaving. I do, because he will just go to another league where this is not going to be enforced on him. And I can really see that happening, that Sheikh Mansour leaves and, God forbid, Arsenal are the ones that fill that void, because they've invested. I think Arsenal have pushed the envelope in their expenditure. They were warned a year ago by their expenditure by UEFA, and yet they carried on spending, and nothing's happened. And as you quite rightly put in your video a few months ago, about 2 or 3 months ago, by all rights, Chelsea should not be in European competition this season because they have breached UEFA's own rules, the same rules which banished AC Milan from the competition and with a big fine. Was it 2 years ago?
But that was on the presumption that their revenue, because UEFA works to percentage of revenue spend, right? But if they suddenly got those if they got the hotel revenue put on it, then it would have been fine. If they get the training ground revenue put on they're probably okay. Well, the last thing I say
hasn't gone through. Can I just say to you that?
Yeah, it hasn't been approved. It hasn't been approved yet.
Still not been approved.
Yeah.
So my point is, if that deal has not been approved, Sean, by the 30th of June, which is the FFP and PSR deadline, that should mean that they have not met the rules. They have not met the FFP and PSR deadline. They can't do. If that deal hasn't gone through, now that they failed.
But now that the amendment regarding infrastructure sales has been rejected, I think that they have no option but to approve it, because they're working within the rules, because the rules aren't clear. And like I say, I don't blame the people who take advantage of the system. I blame the people who are paid a lot of money to create the system and to tighten the rules and to think of things. And it doesn't take a genius. It shouldn't take a genius. These lawyers are paid thousands and thousands of pounds for an hour's work, and yet they can't go, oh, hang about, maybe there's a common theme here that clubs are able to just sell to sister companies, especially in the era of VC capital investment, where you have 6 or 7 different parties that are all spider web interlinked, and that you can sell to one another with it. It's just robbing people.
What's the biggest?
Exactly the same as 777 partners, and that is a ticking time bomb.
Which is laughable. Can I just say, I'm sure I read it right, but it's a farce. The Premier League so far have spent £30 million on lawyers' fees fighting its own members.
Ridiculous.
Just think about that for a minute. We're arguing about giving the championship and what have you, grassroots football money, yet we're happy to throw away £30 million, right? Arguing and defending ourselves against our own members, when if the rules were in place and they were stringent, black and white, this is the fine, this is the points deduction, and you've all agreed and it's all written in law, then you don't need to spend £30 million. It's because the bloody laws have been written up so poorly, with holes like a sieve, as you said before, that they're finding their ways through it.
And that there's 4 or 5 other loopholes that they've already figured out that they just haven't used yet, and we haven't heard about them yet. But there's the next one coming as well. Look, it's an absolute joke. Last thing I would say, because you mentioned Arsenal, for what it's worth, and I hate to say this, but during the research I've been putting in for this video I was going to do, because once I sort of been looking at, well, who has won the trophies from 1950 to 2024, a 75-year review in blocks, right? Who's won the trophies? Who are the consistent themes? Who's won solo entities? Can you kind of like chip off some of the ones that are like, one team that has only won one trophy in 75 years and it happened to be a cup? That stuff can happen through variance and luck. So let's look at the overriding themes here. And you know what? Once you get down to the nitty gritty and you see the data, and then you try to figure out what are the underlying common denominators around what made those teams be able to compete as consistently and successfully as they have, there are 3 or 4 very, very consistent themes. The only one that stands out is Arsene Wenger's period at Arsenal during the early 2000s, when he remained competitive, but didn't have the money. They just built the stadium. They had to pay all of the stadium debt off as quickly as they could. And so every single time that they had a new one of their best players, they were selling them to their rivals and yet still managing to compete. And the reason being was that was at the very dawn of the internet, before there was like this scout system where everybody knows about every 14-year-old that's coming up, no matter where they're from in the world. Back then, Wenger had, you know, tapped into the French market or wherever he was getting his talent from.
Everywhere.
Everywhere, right? But that was his kind of point of difference, alongside being a massive overseer of the entire club. But he's the guy that probably disproves the theory that you have to be the wealthiest club to be able to be consistently successful, because Arsenal did it in spite of the fact that they had to lose all of their best players all the time and replace them with unknowns that happen to be awesome. But it's very different. And so going through this process of researching for this video I'm going to make, like I've grown sympathy for not just Tottenham, but for Aston Villa, who have been ambitious now, but the Pied Piper's calling for them on FFP. Everton, who have obviously spent recklessly, but Everton used to be a team that were very successful. They won as many trophies as Tottenham have, give or take, over the years. You know, there's like, you got the 3 or 4 or 5 teams that have won more than everybody else by a mile, and then you have a block of about 7 or 8 different teams that have won a lot, nowhere near as much, but a lot. And then you have the rest that are all just like 1 or 2 trophies over their entire existence. And it does, to me, the way I've kind of pulled it apart, it looks like unless the rules are upheld, enforced, upheld, and the loopholes are tightened up, then I don't see anyone ever getting back into it, unless you happen to be another
almost like
trillionaire
closed shop. It's a closed shop. You know, very unlikely that someone's going to come from the Championship and disrupt the top 6. It's going to be very, very, very difficult.
It was only Chelsea and City who did it, and you know what the weirdest thing is? Manchester City's biggest and most successful period has come after FFP was introduced. Chelsea's,
well, of course, because it's like it's closing the door. What they've done is spend all the money and close the door after the horse has bolted. Right. We've done it all now. Let's close the door. Now no one else can catch us because there's going to be restrictions, you know. And Levy thinking we'll build a stadium, we'll build our revenue streams so we can be competitive. But unfortunately,
and to be fair to him, he has done a brilliant job with his vision and his foresight. Yeah. But unfortunately, it's not up to him to enforce the rules, and it's not up to him to make sure. Well, I guess he is part of the people that are supposed to write the laws with a fine-tooth comb. And so maybe he is responsible, but ultimately his vision towards getting us prepared for a future that was set via FFP has been brilliant. But the future that he saw happening versus the future that's currently playing out are 2 very different things.